You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. I'm excited to kick off the month of May with an episode of Break Time Tech Talks, even though this one feels a bit more unusual for me. First, this week was a bit of an off week, but I'll catch you up on what I was able to accomplish. From setting up a couple more speaking opportunities in the near future to catching up on developer blog reviews and a few little snippets of learning, this reminded me that productivity doesn't always mean hustle and exciting progress. There is still value in some of the quieter work and the quieter weeks. Then I found a couple of fun content pieces to discuss, one on new Cypher features for batching and one from Nodes AI. Let's jump in. To start us off, I did have some disruptions this week, so my schedule got a little bit out of whack. I am working on rescheduling the GraphRag fundamentals training that was supposed to happen early this week. There will be updates soon on a new date. It'll probably be in June, and I'm hoping for APAC-friendly time zones again. I will keep you posted on all the details there. This week also forced me to adjust some of my priorities because some of the disruptions earlier on. So there are not as many exciting things happening. However, I'll do what I can and share what I did get done. I worked on some of the backlog for the Neo4j developer blog. If you're not familiar, this is a technical blog that is published to the neo4j.com website, and it's all run by internal folks as far as reviewing and processing and publishing everything. But anyone in the community can submit Graph or Neo4j related topics. You just need a medium.com account, and then we need to add your username as a writer to our publication. Once that gets done, you can write your blog post in Medium and then just submit it to our publication, and we will get things reviewed and published and push the process along. Once it does get published in Medium, we copy it over to our neo4j.com/developer blog website and put the process through to get it published there as well. So if you are part of the Graph community, not only do you get a published blog post on Medium, you also get it copied over to neo4j.com developer blog as well, which is really exciting. I love that we have been doing this for several years and this process has not changed. However, there's been some internal changes where things have been moved around, and we had a little bit of a backlog because people were out or had other events going on and things like that. So I filled in a little bit this week and really enjoyed the process. It reminds me that there are a ton of really brilliant, amazing people in this space, in the community, that have really interesting use cases, concepts, ideas, perspectives, data sets, and so much more that they can provide a ton of value to those of us internally as well as others in the community external to Neo4j. I do highly recommend tech blogging. Yes, I am a bit biased because I love tech blogging and I have my own tech blog, but I think this is possibly an easier entry point into advocacy type activities. The reason being, if you're not really a fan of public speaking or getting up in front of people to talk, tech blogging gives you a way to remain somewhat anonymous, allow you multiple attempts and editing work and draft work to really polish something really nicely before you put it out there. And it just makes it a little bit more insulated of a process and less of a stage and lights type of process. It's a bit less dramatic, if you will, but it is a great way to get your name, your technical expertise, your perspectives out there and put something down and publish it to the community. And then of course you can slowly build that over time. Now I did this a little bit backwards. I got hired on at Neo4j. I did some public speaking and then I started a tech blog. But I would recommend if you are just totally against public speaking and not sure you want to go there yet, to start small. Something like a podcast or a tech blog or another approach is a nice entry point to build those technical skills and yet start building your comfort and experience in the community as a whole. Okay, one little tidbit I did pick up this week that I really enjoyed was I was working through a little bit more of the Neo4j Definitive Guide O'Reilly book, and they talked a little bit about, there was a whole chapter on security, and there was a small section of this that talked about SQL and Cypher injection. Now, this is something I grew up learning through classes and my programming degrees, but I never really fully grasped it. I got the general idea that okay, hackers and bad actors, if you use string concatenation, can inject bad things into the code. So don't use string concatenation. Always use parameters or variables or however they want to determine it. Again, I never fully grasped this And I think it's because I don't really think like an attacker, right? As many of us probably don't. I thought the book outlined this really well and showed some good examples and explained it so that I actually finally grasped what SQL and Cypher injection is trying to do and why you need to really avoid this in your development. The first little tidbit that I picked up was that string concatenation allows a hacker to add things to the string. Now, yes, I knew that part already. Here's the tidbit that I did not know. That when you add things to the string, you can comment out the remainder of the query and tack on your own query to potentially delete data or do other harm. So for instance, let's say you pass in some dummy value to the string concatenation, but then you add a double slash at the end, which is Cypher's commenting. Anything that might come after that in the query now gets commented out. The original developer might have written to pull additional data in and do some algorithms and whatever it happens to be. But if an attacker adds a couple of slashes at the end, now all of a sudden the rest of that query is commented out and they can do whatever they want before those comments, right? So now they could add in a detach delete command to the end after the parameter. Then they do the detach delete all of your data and then do the comment slash at the end to comment anything else that might have come after that. I really thought these examples made it much more real and finally solidified what this stuff was trying to do. So I do highly recommend that. Even if you don't have access or don't want to purchase a copy of Neo4j The Definitive Guide, look for some examples and other blog posts or other content that talk a little bit more about this and just explain some of these concepts that maybe we don't interact with every day, or maybe we don't quite comprehend because we don't think like bad actors, right? Okay. I also worked on the Java book this week, and after struggling a little bit, I decided just write it. Just sit down and do it. The biggest challenges I have come across for this are thinking outside the box. Because we are doing an AI learning approach to this book, it's a little bit different than probably how most of us learned to write a programming language. I also have to figure out a little bit how and when to introduce specific topics. I want to keep the perspective that we as writers only need to introduce certain things as we need to use them. Now, my mental model for this is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. As an example, she never introduced too much at a time. She only introduced the bits of the magical world as they became relevant to the story. A couple of little examples from her books are things like the port keys in book 4. She didn't talk about port keys or how they worked or what they did until you got to book 4 and you needed that information in order to tell the story. Same thing with something like Horcruxes later on in books 6 and 7. That was a concept that wasn't really necessary, so they didn't talk about it earlier on in the series. And I really want to keep this in mind as I'm writing this Java book. What are concepts, ideas, pieces of the Java language that you need earlier on as you start to need to use them, right? Specific concepts like variables or data or objects or whatever it happens to be, whatever we're working through in the chapter, we need to introduce only the things that matter at that particular time. And then as you get further along and you start building those skills, then bring some of those examples back and introduce the more complicated concepts. This is something I am working through. It's been one of my biggest challenges with writing the book, but I am having a lot of fun kind of twisting my mental model a little bit and thinking way outside the box of how I learned how to program and try to do that for someone who might be coming in completely new. I will also add that my approach for teaching and working through technical things on a day-to-day basis is based a lot on how I learned music. Music is often taught through colorful metaphors and experimentation and lots of listening to and or watching examples. This is because music is very abstract and very unique to a particular individual. How they might learn best, how they approach things, the way their body is situated on the instrument, how much air they might have if you're dealing with a wind instrument, how large their finger spread is when you're looking at a piano keyboard, things like this all have to come into play when you're learning an instrument. The way that you learn how to play something has to be very unique to you. You watch lots of different examples, you listen to your teacher give examples and show how to play it. You'll have them explain in different metaphors of how you can think of particular phrases or particular stacks of chords and things like that. It all becomes very unique, and it is very abstract, individual, unique perspectives on things. So I am approaching my writing, and I always have. My technical blogs, I think, follow this model as well because it is so ingrained in me. It's the way I learned a lot of things growing up, but especially music, because music was such a big part of my life growing up. And then, of course, I also started teaching very early as well in music. A lot of these concepts have been built up over time, and it's things that I really enjoy taking technology from this perspective and trying to help others learn it in a possibly unique and custom way. I am also rescheduling the training that I mentioned earlier that had to end up needing to be rescheduled. Plus, I am lining up a couple more events for May and June. I will keep you posted. More information on those soon. The content pieces for this week. The first one I came across was a blog post that has been sitting out there for a little bit, but I finally sat down and got to read through it, which I was excited to do. It's called Batching Like a Pro. And this is a blog post by Gemma Lamont. She does a lot of presentations and blog posts on Cypher specifically, and I always enjoy her content and things she's working on. This particular blog post looked at APOC's periodic iterate procedure and against the Cypher call-in transactions features. Now, we didn't used to have this capability in Cypher. However, the Cypher team has closed that gap in the features where now the APOC procedure that used to do this is almost obsolete, which is kind of interesting, kind of sad a little bit because I love APOC. But on the other hand, it is really nice to have these features now built into Cypher and Neo4j out of the box. Gemma walks through all of the ways that the Cypher call-in transactions can compare with the older APOC version. For instance, the in transactions, batching was the key to the APOC procedure. This is what made that apoc.periodic.iterate procedure so valuable. I can't tell you how many data load scripts of mine used apoc.periodic.iterate. And by the way, I haven't completely upgraded them all yet either. Hopefully I will get to that somewhat soon. However, this was really the key, and the call-in transactions that was added in Cypher, it's probably been a couple of years ago now, was able to do that batching. However, there were lots of other little nuanced things that the APOC procedure did that the call-in transactions couldn't do when it was initially released. They've continued to add some of those features in, and this blog post walks through all of those features and does a feature comparison of the two things to see now that you get all of the value you had in the APOC procedure now in Cypher call-in transactions. The first few things that the blog post walks through is aspects like memory tracking and error hunting, query planning, query statistics, entity rebinding, concurrency, and error on retry. The biggest change here is that an external procedure, which is what APOC procedures were, they were all bundled up, created as a jar file, and then you could drop those into your plugins folder in Neo4j. So they were all seen as external procedures to the database. Your external procedure has limited visibility from the database internals. You can't expose a lot of those things. There's not a whole lot of insight to the database internals, which is why there is more debugging and fine-tuning capability in the Cypher call-in transactions. For instance, now that you have the call-in transactions that's now built into Cypher, you can do a lot of memory tracking, understanding how much memory usage a query is taking, fine-tune that a little bit. You can do better error hunting. Now you can expose those errors much better because, again, it's all coming from those database internals. Planning your query, an external procedure isn't able to be planned in quite the same way inside Cypher. So you don't get the detailed query planning of what the query is trying to do. Whereas in Cypher, you get all of that detail in how the database internals planned that query. And then you get more detailed query statistics, so what it exactly did, its usage, and so on. Entity rebinding. This was something that the APOC procedure had to do. It needed to select the initial set and then rematch that set in order to do the operation in the second part of the query. Now with call-in transactions, you don't have to select and then rematch and operate on those. So that makes it a little bit more efficient. You have concurrency now available in Cypher call-in transactions. That was one of the things that was huge for APOC for a long time, is that you could run a query across multiple threads. Now you can also do that in the Cypher call-in transactions. You can use parallel runtimes where you can do lots of different transactions across multiple threads. And then now you also have error on retry. So if something errors out in call-in transactions, you can just have it try again. And there's a few different parameters you can adjust on its retry strategy there. I really enjoyed getting the insight into the nuts and bolts comparison and seeing what all the Cypher version of this call-in transactions can do now that it couldn't do before. Last but not least, all of the Nodes AI videos are now available on YouTube. So if there was something you missed, you can now catch up. I know I will be trying to do that over the next few weeks. I will leave the link to the YouTube playlist in the show notes so everyone can check that out as interested. This week, I still found ways to create movement forward. I worked on scheduling a few more opportunities to speak in the community, helped get community tech blogs reviewed and published, as well as did some writing. Then I had a couple of content pieces, a comparison of the Cypher call-in transactions versus the older APOC procedure, and Nodes AI videos, now all fully released so we can enjoy at our leisure. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.